What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be working on the 350Z behind me. We're going to be installing a Chase Bay's power steering cooler, which I've had sitting around for far too long. And this is just another added measure of precaution while this car is out on the track to keep everything cool. So I'm excited to go ahead and dive into it. So let's get started. So believe it or not, I've actually been working with Chase Bay's and talking to the guys over there since I was building the 240, which was starting before I moved to California. So we're going on 2 or 3 years now. They actually helped me out with some parts for the 240. And when that car ended up getting sold, they allowed me to swap out the parts that I hadn't used for the 240 for the equivalent for the 350Z. So I really appreciate everything they've done over there. They make some of the most quality products for aftermarket stuff, and I've absolutely been blown away with everything that I've used by them. And they've been kind enough to hook you guys up with a discount as well. So if you're looking at anything from Chase Bay's, whether it's a power steering cooler, brake lines, they make a ton of high quality stuff, which you'll see more here of in a second. But just use code AVERAGEBROS. I'll put that up on the screen here, and that'll save you 10% off your total purchase. But let me go ahead and show you guys a little bit more of this kit, why I chose this kit, and why I really think Chase Bay's makes some of the best products out there. All right, so I've got the whole kit laid out here in front of me, and I just want to take a sec to kind of walk through the different features of this kit and what makes this kit so much different than the other ones on the market, and why I really think it's one of the best ones out there. So first and foremost, I want to note that the actual cooler itself is an optional add-on. You can do this kit as just a replacement for your factory power steering kit, which is an upgrade for a lot of reasons, so I want to touch on those first. So one of the big ones is this baffled reservoir here. So this, compared to your stock one, is going to make it harder for this to bubble over, and you're going to have less chance of it spilling out on the track. You'll also notice that it has AN fittings on the bottom, which is going to reduce the chance of it leaking out of there or that coming disconnected at all. So that's a really nice piece as well. You'll notice that there's a bracket that specifically fits, so this mounts in the stock location and is a huge upgrade over the stock reservoir. And throughout the rest of the kit, it uses AN fittings as well, and that is a huge upgrade over stock. These hoses can handle a lot more pressure, and the heat and pressure that's going to happen out on the track, this is going to stand up to it. So these are the low pressure lines, and you'll see they're all nylon braided. They've got AN fittings on the end, so just really high quality stuff. And it also has AN fittings that are going to go into the rack as a replacement for that. Now the high pressure line, this one is a little bit different. It's a steel braided line with a plastic cover over it. Again, AN fittings on both sides, and just super high quality stuff. So the last thing that I really like about this is the particular oil cooler that they picked. So I believe this is a 9-row Cetrab oil cooler. And from everyone that I've talked to who's in motorsports, they said the Cetrab stuff is some of the best. So I appreciate that Chase Bay's went with a really high quality cooler in their setup. Now, like I said, this is an optional add-on, but for a car that's gonna see track time, I wanted to make it as bulletproof as possible and did opt to go with this. So altogether, if I'm remembering correctly, this kit with the optional cooler is about 500 bucks. And as far as mounting that cooler goes, it didn't come with an actual mounting setup, so it allows you to choose your own. I opted to use the Cetrab bracket on the bottom here, along with some hardware that's going to match the Z1 Motorsport setup that I have on my oil cooler. Now, Z1 was nice enough to hook me up with the hardware on this so that I could have a matching setup, because I'm OCD like that and wanted my two coolers to match in how they were mounted. Now, if you've shopped for these power steering coolers before or any setups like this, you'll see just from looking at that stuff that Chase Bay's is a step above the rest. As far as using a nice cooler, the lines, everything is just a grade above everything else that's out there on the market. Most of those other lines in the aftermarket kits are rubber, they don't use AN fittings, and so for that reason I chose to do the Chase Bay setup, and I'm super excited to have them on board for the build and really excited to get this installed on the car. But enough talking about it, let's go ahead and get the car up in the air so we can actually start working on it. And it's at this point that I really wish that I had opted for a front jack point on my Street Faction bash bar, but I didn't. So unfortunately, I'm gonna jack the rear end of the car up and then have to pull off the front bumper and side skirts to get the front end up in the air as well. Obviously, you have to take off the front bumper to get it on anyway, but it is kind of a hassle. I have to take off my side skirts to get the car up in the air. I'm gonna spare you guys the boredom and just go ahead and get this car up, and I'll see you guys once the car's in the air. So I've got the car up in the air. So the new oil cooler is gonna replace this small little factory setup, so all of these lines are gonna go. I may see if I can run the new lines through there. If it can allow it, that would be really cool, because there's a bracket and it would be done nice and clean. So that's definitely gonna be the goal. And then obviously that runs up here to the reservoir, which is going to get replaced. So I'm going to start tearing apart this system here. Obviously we have to get all the fluid out, which I'm thinking the easiest way to do that is drain it from the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and try to drain the fluid out. Cool thing to point out too is I have the Chase Bay's coolant reservoir, so this will match the new piece going in here and look super good. I've got the factory cooler off down there. I don't know how well you could tell on video. I disconnected the brackets from the car before trying to disconnect the hoses. I might recommend doing it the other way just so you're not trying to hold on to the actual cooler down there to pull these off. But either way, I've got both those disconnected. Most of the fluid is drained out of the system. Once you've finished up down here, there's a bracket up here. I've already taken it off and just put the screw back in there that loosens up those hoses. And then the next thing I'm gonna work on is getting this reservoir out of here and just continuing to pull off the stock parts. All right, I did get the reservoir out. One of the hoses down here, even when I removed the hose clamp, didn't want to come off, so I ended up just cutting it because I decided it wasn't worth my time to fight with it. So the next thing I'm trying to do is figure out how to get these lines out of here. I think I need to move this coolant reservoir just to help me get to the hose clamp so I can pull those off. Originally, I was going to try to salvage a lot of the hose and stuff just in case, you know, someone wanted this cooler kit, but I think for the sake of my time, if something's gonna fight me too long, I think I'm just gonna cut it off because I don't plan on putting this back on. And if I can't give it away, it's not the end of the world. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to pull these guys out and get the last of these hoses that go down to the rack out of the car so we can start putting the new stuff in. Got all the lines out of the front of the car, everything out up here. So what's left is the lines that run from the pump back, and then this return line here, which we cut off. So I need to pull those off. In order to do that, we gotta get under the car, and I'm gonna remove the brace that's under here because it's gonna make all of this stuff more accessible. I'll show you guys which one I'm talking about once I've pulled it off. And here's the brace I was talking about. So with this out, we have much better access to the stock lines to pull those out and then eventually route the new lines in. So one of the last things we need to disconnect is this hard line that comes off of the pump because this one's already disconnected here, that return line. This is the high pressure line from the factory. I'm unsure, so there is a sensor down here that's hooked up to it. I don't know exactly what that does. Obviously it's related to power steering, but there's not an option to use that with the Chase base kit. So I reached out to them to try to figure out what to do on that. For now, I'll obviously just leave it unplugged. I'm gonna go ahead and wait to disconnect the top part here and disconnect the lines down on the rack first to try to drain any fluid that might be in these lines and try to minimize the mess up here. I don't know how well I'm gonna be able to film under the car, but I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect these from the rack. Lines disconnected from the bottom, so I'm gonna go ahead and try to disconnect this hard line up top. From wiggling them down below, it seems like something is bolted in down here along the frame rail, which is gonna be an absolute nightmare if it is. So I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm gonna loosen this up now that all the fluid's drained out and see if I can pull them out. Now I understand that no car manufacturer builds their car around the accessibility of taking parts off to put aftermarket parts on, but Nissan definitely did not anticipate anyone taking these lines off because they put some bolts in damn near impossible positions to get out. Let me show what I'm talking about. So we are down to the very last bolt, and I can't seem to find a spot to show you guys necessarily, but there is a bolt down here between the actual body of the car and the motor that's mounted to the subframe. I've gotten one of them out, which I was able to tediously get out from the bottom on that side. Now the other one is covered by a line, which I don't know how I'm gonna get to that. I certainly can't film it. I'm gonna mess with that a little bit. Obviously there is a way to get it out. I just don't know what that's gonna be. But once that bolt is out, all of the stock lines are done and gone, and then we can start putting the new stuff in. All right. I got the lines out. Lewis came out and helped me get that last bolt out, and I just want to know, whoever designed that system, who hurt you? Because that was absolutely miserable. Let me show you guys what we had to deal with. So this was the bracket I was telling you guys about. This mounts to the subframe. I was able to get this one out from the back, but then this one, when it was sitting in the car, was sitting like that. That's what I was looking at from the top. So there was no way to get it from the top. Lewis ended up snaking a wrench in from this way with an open-ended box wrench and was able to get it off, which is a miracle, to be honest. So all of the power steering components from the factory are out of the car, so now it's a matter of installing the new system. It's gotten a little bit late, so I'm just gonna pick up tomorrow when I'm fresh and don't have to rush and can get the lines laid out exactly how I want, so I'll see you guys then. All right, you guys, we are back for day 2 of this install, and it's worth calling out that if you're watching this video about to do the install, it definitely doesn't need to take 2 days. I just started too late yesterday, so you can definitely do it in 1 day. It's probably a 6 to 8 hour project at most. But let me show you guys what I've been working on this morning. So I loosely mocked up the cooler here with that bracket that I showed you guys yesterday. Now this is actually just using the 2 bolt holes that the factory cooler mounted to. Originally I was gonna put in kind of a riv nut style like I did over here and do the same setup, but I figured if I can get away with using those factory mounting holes, I'm gonna do it because it's pretty damn close to the height of that one. I would say it's probably sits 2 millimeters lower at most, and I'm really not looking to add extra holes into this core support just for the sake of 2 millimeters on something that you're hardly gonna see. But I'm gonna go ahead and pull this stuff off, show you guys how to get this cooler mounted up, get that in position, and my thought is mount that, run the lines from the rack, and then we'll have a better idea up here of where the actual reservoir needs to go. So I'm gonna throw you guys on a tripod, pull this off, and then we'll talk about how to get it mounted up. So at this point in the video, unfortunately some of the audio was corrupted, so I'm going to do my best to voice over what I was talking about at that point in time. Now you can see here the bracket on the bottom of the cooler. Now this is going to mount on there. It's got pre-existing holes and it mounts up real nice. And then it uses a little piece of metal with a rubber insulator on it that screws onto the top there. So that's going to tighten down and make sure that it doesn't rattle or have any issues like that. And here you can see we've got the cooler all mounted up, nice and secured. So we're gonna go ahead and take this and mount it up to the car now that we've got those bolts on the side there tightened down and ready to go. So with the cooler all mounted up here, you can see I chose to run this wire right below it, underneath there. It fits really nicely, nice and snug. Got a zip tie on the bottom there, so it's not going to actually go anywhere, and looks really clean just attached to there. Now my initial plan was to use a bracket like this one on the smaller cooler as well, but because the cooler is so much smaller, when I put this bracket up to the cooler, it didn't really seem necessary. There wasn't a whole lot of give to it, and it didn't really seem like it was necessary to drill extra holes and put this mounting bracket in the center. And I had already moved the cooler over a little bit more than I had planned on to begin with, so it just really didn't line up and didn't seem entirely necessary, so I opted to just run the bracket on the bottom, and I'm sure it's totally sufficient. So with the cooler mounted up to the bracket on the car, it's now time to get those lines mounted up to the rack. And the nice thing about the Chase Base kit, as I mentioned previously, is it's all AN fittings. So it's got an adapter that's going to go into your steering rack to allow you to mount those AN style fittings to the hoses. Super clean install here. So now that we're under the car, you can see where those go in. I was talking about which one goes in which. Unfortunately, I don't remember off the top of my head which one was which, but they are screwed into the correct hose when you get them from Chase Base, so it's really easy to figure out which one goes where. So we got the hoses all mounted up. You can see kind of the angle that I went with here. You do want to make sure that you're going to get clearance, because keep in mind that that brace that I showed you guys earlier does have to go back on the bottom here. So with those fitted, we're going to make sure we can figure out how to get these secured down below, and I want to figure out a way to attach the 2 hoses there to the stock bracket, which you can see in the center of the screen, because that's where it was mounted from the factory. So we're going to try to figure out something similar. Now I opted to use one of these vibrant line separators. I had them for a different project, but I went ahead and stole it for this project because I thought it would work out very nicely, and use this to put the 2 hoses through it and then actually zip tie or attach that to the bottom of the car. And you can see here I did just what I was talking about earlier. Use that line separator to keep those lines separate so they're not rubbing on each other, and then ran a zip tie between the center of them through that bracket that's going to hold that in place and not allow it to go anywhere. Now with the hoses connected to the steering rack, the last piece to do here is connect the high pressure line back into the power steering pump, and as with the rest of the kit, it comes with a nice fitting that's going to be able to convert that pump to an AN fitting and make this conversion super easy. So I'm going to go ahead and get this connected in here and continue on with the install. What's up, you guys? Well, it is actually a few days later. I ran into some minor issues, one of which I relocated the reservoir because the way that I had it before wasn't working, and I had to order a new pump feed line from Chase Bays. And then while I was shortening the return line from the cooler to the reservoir, I broke one of the AN fittings. So let me show you where we're at real quick. So as you can see, here's the 90-degree AN fitting that I snapped off on accident. Got a new replacement from Chase Bays that we're gonna put on. And then I ended up relocating the reservoir from where it was. I don't believe that I showed it on footage. I'm gonna cut out any old footage of where I had it. But originally I had it mounted over here and it was just too close and it put too much of a kink in this hose here, which I think was part of the leak. And unfortunately, the way that I had cut the hose previously to fit that location was too short to put it over here. So as you're looking to locate your reservoir, I recommend putting it as far over here as possible to give this hose a little bit of length to run off that fitting. Just because it's kind of an awkward fitting the way that it comes up, and this was the one angle that I could seem to get it to work how I wanted. So unfortunately I don't have any footage of me mounting this, but I just used the headlight bracket here, and I was actually able to use the bracket that I didn't use down here, this style bracket here that Z1 sells for their oil cooler, and used a piece off of that to mount it up into here. So it's a little L bracket with a threaded piece that the bolt goes into, and then I cut off a piece of black metal that I had that screws in here and on there, and as you can see, it's very firmly mounted and is not going anywhere. So unfortunately I couldn't find a way to use the bracket that came in the kit, but I'm super happy with this solution here. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that new hose fitting on the hose, which I've shortened by about 6 inches just to take out the slack in that, and then I'll show you guys how I'm running the lines. All right, so I've got the new fitting on this line here. So we're gonna go ahead and get these connected. This line that runs out of here is the one coming from the rack. So that's gonna go on the left-hand side over here. Fluid comes back from the rack warm, gets cooled through here, and comes back out the other side to go back to the reservoir. So you'll see the lines run back up through here, through that factory hole that I talked about earlier. So we're gonna have that nice clean factory look and be able to utilize the bracket that went there to hold those in place. But I'll talk more about that once I'm getting there. For now, I'm gonna go ahead and get these two connected. With the lines connected down below, we can go ahead and move into the engine bay. So the only thing I still need to do is connect the fitting that running from the hose on the cooler up to the reservoir. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that on. And then the last thing to do is, once we've got it tightened on this end and this end, is I'll get this part buttoned up here. But I wanted to make sure that we had both ends tightened and in place so I could get these fixed while they're in their final location, and then we'll be able to bleed the car. So I've got the hose all tightened on. You'll notice I did my best to get these two at the same angle here, so they match coming out of there, and then that we have clearance on the belt here. So once that's zip tied in, we'll have a little bit more, and what I had done before was kind of zip tied those two together, so it gave it extra clearance. But got plenty of room, but you can see why I shortened that up a little bit. Like I said, I probably took about 6 inches off. This runs down through the front and then comes out here, but we've got it looking really nice. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that bracket on up front like we talked about. Basically, this held the factory hard lines. Because they were hard lines, you didn't really have to worry about them rubbing through on the metal bracket. But because we have these nylon braided ones now, I've actually got a little piece of rubber that I tucked in there before just to insulate the braided hose from the metal. But I'm gonna go ahead and get this back installed, get that factory look up front, and then we'll be pretty much ready to bleed the car and take this thing out for a rip. All right, moment of truth. We're all buttoned up down here. Got a zip tie on there. Bracket looking super clean there. Got everything tidied up in here. Nice little zip tie on there, pulling the wire out of the way, as you can see there. So we got plenty of clearance on the belt. So let's go ahead and bleed this thing. So the first step in the bleeding process is to fill up the reservoir halfway. Now Chase Bays raves about the bleeding process, says it's super simple, and the way that their system's set up, it breathes really easily. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill that reservoir to half full, and I'll tell you what's next from there. So with the reservoir half full now, we're gonna get the car lifted up in the air. It was lifted up when I initially did this, but when I moved it around in the garage, it's now back on the ground. But we wanna lift it up so the front tires are off the ground, and while the car is in the not started position, you can turn it on so you can get your power steering activated, but rotate the wheel back and forth a few times to get fluid into the system. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the car up in the air and rotate that back and forth a few times. And then from there, we'll let the car start up, let it idle for 3 to 5 minutes, make sure there's no leaks, repeat the steering wheel process, and we'll take it out for a test drive. So as you can hear, the car is running behind me. We got some fluid into the system, and now we're gonna let it run for 3 to 5 minutes at idle while we check all the connections for any leaks. So I'm gonna go ahead and look over the car. If it looks good, then we'll rotate the wheel back and forth a few times while it's up in the air, drop it back down, do the same thing, and then take it for a test drive. So the car has now been running for about 5 minutes. I'm not seeing any leaks. As you just saw, I rotated the wheel back and forth again after the car had been idling. So now we're gonna set it down on the ground, rotate the wheel back and forth a few times, and then we'll take it for a test drive. Now I'm gonna real quick just put a little bit more fluid in the reservoir just to make sure that it stays at that halfway mark, and that's one thing you definitely wanna make sure you're doing throughout the bleeding process here. All right, so I'm gonna hop back in the car now that it's on the ground, do 2 to 3 more rotations of the wheel with the wheels actually touching the ground, and then we're gonna take it around the block. So I'll throw you guys on a GoPro. We're gonna drive around for 15 to 20 minutes, park it, let it cool, make sure there's no leaks, and then wrap this thing up. Nice little rip as directed by the boys over at Chase Bays, and so far so good. So the point of that test drive and going out for 15 to 20 minutes is to listen for any weird noises or anything that didn't sound like it did before you started the install. Fortunately, I didn't hear anything that sounded strange other than my diff clunking and all the welded diff stuff that was there before, but it seems like we're good to go. So I'm gonna let the car sit for just a sec, make sure I don't see any final leaks. But while we're doing that, let's take a look at just how good this stuff looks in the engine bay. Like I was saying, Chase Bays seriously makes some of the best parts in the automotive aftermarket, and I promise you once you put your hands on it, you will definitely agree with that. So I just want to give a big thank you to the guys over at Chase Bays once again for helping me out with a little bit of a discount on these parts to make this build possible. And even better, they offered you guys a discount as well. So if you use code AVERAGEBROS, I'll throw it up on the screen again here, you'll save 10% off your entire order with Chase Bays, and they make stuff for Nissans, BMWs, Subarus, you name it. And they've got a ton of good parts if you're doing a swap to convert into some higher quality stuff. So definitely check them out. They've probably got stuff for your car. But that's gonna go ahead and wrap up this video. I hope for the guys that are doing the install themselves that you found this video helpful. But until next time, peace out, and I'll see you soon.